Hello, I'm Chris Flisher, and welcome to Turning of the Wheel, an intelligent, lively discussion about astrology, art, and spiritual adventure. Timing is everything, and as the great wheel turns, we are best prepared when we are best informed. Join me as I explore concepts that allow us to broaden our view of the world. You'll hear interesting topics, meet fascinating guests, and discover who you really are. Using the time-tested practices of astrology, you'll learn how to accept change as the great wheel of life turns. Astrology, art, and spiritual adventure on Turning of the Wheel TV with Chris Flisher. Hello and welcome to Turning of the Wheel. My name is Chris Flisher. As you know, this is my show about astrology, art, and spiritual adventure. I'm always out there trying to explore new avenues of understanding the way the world works, the way astrology works, and how the whole thing fits together. Because there's so much richness in this language, so much to be learned and garnered from the laws of the universe and the geometry and the metaphysics that go with it, that I think it's fascinating to discuss it. It allows us to find logic and purpose and reason for our lives, and I find it to be very helpful to explore every way we can, because we don't want to be honed in on any one area of the world or any one philosophy. We want to be able to take a composite view of the world, a little bit of this, a little bit of that, and put together an idea that makes us feel whole and understand our purpose. So we're going to continue our discussion today about the Sabian assembly, and particularly about the Sabian symbols, which is a branch of astrology. I'm referring to it as a branch of astrology because it is a different approach to astrology than we've typically seen. As you know, in an astrology chart, we have a 360-degree circle. In the Sabian symbols, there is a symbol for each individual degree of this whole circle. So there's 360 symbols. And my guest today is Michael Elliott. We had him on recently, and he's going to discuss with us and describe how the Sabian symbols came about and the history and the logic behind them. So it's great to have you on again today, Michael. Thank you very much
nice for coming on. Yeah.
So tell us the story of the Sabian assembly, of the Sabian symbols.
Yeah.
There are two different things. We're getting into the astrology piece of it now. I know it's a fascinating story. It really has this really sort of movie-like quality to it as a story, sort of like a mythology. So tell us the story.
Yeah, well, it's a long story if you really want to get into details, but...
well, tell us the story about Elsie Wheeler and Mark Edmund Jones.
Elsie Wheeler is actually the second woman. There was two women, and if you get the original book that Mark wrote called The Sabian Symbols, you will see a whole chapter on planets and character traits. Where the first woman was actually Zoe Wells. And if people watch this first episode, you'll know the group Sabian Assembly started in 1922. And he had a next door neighbor who was a graphic designer, but she had some psychic abilities. He decided to try out some stuff with him in his research. He was a clairvoyant, she was a psychic medium. So he could bounce things off of her, but he could clarify that with his other abilities with astrology. She wanted to do something, so he took a deck of playing cards, and he knew a method where you could do a tarot layout. And she found symbols for each card. So they had 52 symbols. There was another woman named Elsie Wheeler. Elsie Wheeler was a full-time medium. She was crippled. She was crippled with arthritis. So she was wheelchair bound.
She came out of St. Louis. Didn't she come from St. Louis or the Midwest someplace?
Jones was born in St. Louis. I think she was born in Illinois, if I remember.
Okay. Well, I knew it was the Midwest, but they met in San Diego.
Well, he had to relocate. The Sabian Assembly started in New York City, and then he had to relocate to California, to Los Angeles, to stay as a writer in the movie business. And he was actually involved at Manly Palmer Hall, a very famous researcher.
Right, no, I know him very well,
gave him use of the hall, the place where he had meetings. And that's where the official birthday of the assembly is. The actual start was in New York. Birthday started on October 17th, 23.
So how did they do that? How did they come about the whole symbol system?
So Elsie Wheeler was out there, and he said, well, let's do these symbols. There was a guy named Safariel, and he had done symbols for all the degrees of the zodiac about 50 years before that. And Jones was very dissatisfied. He thought they were too negative, too omen-ridden, if you want.
Okay, right.
So he said, well, let's try something a little different. We're going to, and Elsie Wheeler was she was a typical, she was helping people, but she wanted to do something a little broader.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? So she said, well, I'd love to do that if you want. And so he said, well, we'll go to San Diego. We'll drive down to San Diego. We're going to do this in a very rigorous manner. We're going to go to Balboa Park, which is the big, it's actually a zoo there now, I think.
Right, yeah, I know where that is.
San Diego Zoo.
Yep, absolutely, yeah.
And, but there was back in 1925, this is in 25, a little secluded spot in the park where you could park a car. He could carry her out of the car. He could pick her up. They had 2 chairs and a table. And he had a deck of cards with
Index cards.
Index cards numbered 1 through 360.
Right, and so let me just to clarify that, what he would do is each individual astrology sign has 30 degrees. 30 degrees times 12 is 360. So
right.
You may have 15 degrees Aries, you may have 12 Gemini, you may have 14 Sagittarius, and so forth.
Right.
So for every sign, there are 30 degrees. So he took this stack of cards and shuffled them, right?
Took the whole deck of 360, whole deck, and she would sit there and he'd shuffle and he'd pick one up like this.
So she couldn't see it.
She couldn't see it.
You couldn't see what degree it was.
She couldn't see what the number was. It would just have a number on it, like 15.
Right.
And so, like for example, you get through Aries, you're 30 degrees into the circle, right?
Right.
Taurus is 31.
Right.
And so on all the way through.
All the way around till you get to Pisces, 323, 59.
Yeah, 359.
Right.
So we'd hold up, and then maybe it was, we don't know what the first one he held up. It wasn't the first, it wasn't number 1. It was like maybe number 85.
Okay.
And then she'd go, okay, and a picture would
come into her head, and she would use that as a descriptive symbol for that degree.
A descriptive symbol of the degree. And he'd write it down and then do the next one. So
all random.
Constantly shuffling this deck.
So you wouldn't go from 85 to 86, you would go 85 to 12 to 320.
Right.
Okay.
Right. And he, of course, put that aside.
Right. After she gave him the picture.
Yeah, after she gave him the picture. So he's shuffling, and what they did was they broke it up into 90. They do 90, take a brief break, do another 90, okay? So you're doing quadrants.
4 groups of 90, which is interesting as a astrological and mathematical component. There are 4 elements.
Yeah.
So that's interesting.
Yeah, he was doing it in these quadrants. You can do 4 times 90 is 360,
Mm-hmm.
and they took a long break for lunch so they could rest because it was pretty taxing.
Because all this time, she is channeling this energy in. She's coming up with a visual image of something.
Right.
And the images are as wildly diverse as a ballerina on ice skates or a bomb failing to explode.
Children skating on ice. I have that symbol in my chart.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
Keyword is fun.
Okay. So there's the image that came through to her was a picture of a scene. And they would then ascribe a term or a attribute to that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And some are very abstract. A veiled prophet of power would be one, or a triangle with wings. Okay, but it wasn't just picture images. Some were very, very abstruse. So you have really the whole span of human existence represented in these symbols by the time you're finished. You can pinpoint character if you know the technique very quickly. Doesn't mean you have the whole answer, but it gives you some very deep insights.
Mm-hmm.
I'll tell my story. The reason I got into astrology was I didn't know anything about astrology. My bride, I was married, I'd just gotten married, had given me a weight tarot deck, a traditional Rider-Waite deck. So I was playing with that. And we were living on a commune out in New Mexico. And this guy had an ephemeris, which is tells you when your birthday is.
I know exactly what it is. I got one.
And he was telling you what your Sabian symbol was for your birthday.
So how that works, just for clarification, everybody in their chart, their sun falls at a degree based on your birthday. If you're born wherever you're born, if you're born at April 28th, your birthday is going to be, you're going to have 6 degrees of Taurus, for example.
Right. And I'm April 24th. So I'm 4 degrees of Taurus,
Right.
and you read it, 4 actually rounded off to 5, because
Right.
you round them off.
Because it's based on degree and minutes. So if Michael was 4 degrees, it would be 4 degrees
Yeah.
and say 37 minutes.
Yeah.
You round up to 5,
Yeah.
and 5 would be your symbol.
4, yeah, 4,
So
11,
then you've looked up in that terminology of the circle. You find the degree that pertains to you as an individual.
Yeah.
And then that word and that image has specific
right.
influence or importance for you.
Yeah, and I knew absolutely nothing about astrology. I was completely, I read maybe a horoscope in the paper every couple of weeks or something, you know. But he read my symbol, and it was a widow standing over an open grave. And I went, oh, that's interesting. My mother was widowed when I was 2 years old, never remarried. She's been standing over an open grave the whole time I've been growing up.
Wow.
Now I'm married. So there's the widow transfixed. Actually, I think the original was transfixed. So the death
is
of
there
my
a key word that goes with that?
reorientation.
So you as an individual had to reorient.
My life is one
Gigantic
series
reorientation.
of reorientations after another. It's quite fun.
Yeah.
And the symbol, yeah, it sounds sad, but it was actually literally true at that point in my life. I said, oh yeah, my mother, there it is. So, so that just said, well, you got to come visit me, to the guy who was doing it, and he taught me astrology.
And did that same theory that you mentioned for the sun, does that also apply to where the moon is, where the ascendant is?
Yeah.
So you could find those degrees as well.
Yeah.
Were they as accurate?
Yeah, they're all accurate depending really on what you're going through. Like I was still, I was a young guy, and I was still, actually my mother was still living, we were still living in the same house. We had a family house, but I got married, and we were on this long 3-month road trip around the country, and here I am in a commune. We're both basically hippie, counterculture type couple, you know.
I know the type.
And so here I am. I'm given a symbol that's right out of my life, and I said this takes some looking into.
Mm-hmm.
So I looked into it. The guy came. He was a pretty good astrologer. He was new to it, but he was good. And he taught me.
And so what did that symbol say to you? Did that symbol say to you, was it a verification, was it a validation of who you were? Supposing you were born on a different day, that symbol, and your circumstances were the same. Supposing you were born on, the 25th, and that symbol changed.
The symbol changed, yeah.
Would that apply to you the same way?
Well, that's kind of hypothetical, because I am what I am, and my whole orientation, I think, Jones used to say this. He said heredity and environment are exactly the same thing.
Heredity and environment.
Are exactly the same thing. And you start to think about that for a while, okay? And then you go, oh yeah, that's what astrology does. It shows you that the two things, that's where your background, nurture and nature, right? Okay? Who you are genetically, your code, right? That converges with the circumstances. That, there's a...
I see.
There's a convergence there.
So you come in with a preloaded set of ideas or attributes, and then you enter into an environment that then colors that.
That colors that, nurtures it. If, you catch the essence of who you are real fast, okay? If you have any sense of philosophy, let's say. Right. Then you can keep moving that forward. So that symbol, of course, resonated quite deeply
because it's so apropos.
Yeah, it was so apropos.
Now that was the case with you. Supposing other people found their degree of their sun and they read their symbol and it didn't apply to them, or they didn't feel like it fit. What was that? What's the explanation for that?
Well, first of all, you would look, well, okay, if it's just a sun sign, you're basing, I like to do 3 symbols. And this is a technique where you can do sun, moon, and rising, which is pretty common if you're at a party. And people know a little astrology. You go, oh yeah, I'm a Virgo, and I've got Scorpio rising and moon in Leo. Mm-hmm. Oh, okay, you know a whole bunch about that guy now. Okay, and you can talk the language,
right, yep.
So look at the symbols for that, and you can actually create a little story around it. Okay, so I'll give you. My moon is waxed, well, they're like store mannequins, gowned waxed figures. So in a display.
That's the image she came up with for you.
Yeah, that's the one for my moon, yeah.
Okay.
Yep. And when Jones finally did my chart, he rectified it, and he created a chart that had 5 degrees of Virgo, which is a man dreaming of fairies. So you have this kind of like a widow transfixed, stationary figures with the latest fashion designs, all dressed up, and a man in the countryside, maybe he's just lying somewhere peacefully dreaming of fairies.
Right. So for clarity, I want to get this through so everybody understands this. What happens is that for every degree of the entire wheel, the entire 360-degree wheel, so we have this wheel, every one of those degrees on that wheel has a story, a symbol, a picture that Elsie Wheeler drew from her own, and she did them randomly.
Right.
And then those, you take that image and you have to find a way to extrapolate a story from that, because astrology really is a story.
Right.
The path of humanity is a story. We are a composite of a multitude of different influences, and as we move down the road, that story changes and adapts according to our life and our circumstances and our hereditary, our heredity. And so when we take those images and put them together, do you find yourself scratching your head, or do you find yourself sort of backing into the explanation?
Oh no, it adds a whole new dimension to the.
Does it give you a purpose for who you are and give you guidance for where you're going?
Yeah, it does that. Maybe it's just more about having fun with all of these stories. I mean, you know, why do people tell stories? Because it's entertaining.
It is, yeah.
Life is constantly hopefully reorienting you to new and interesting and maybe even joyous experiences.
Life is a carnival.
Yeah, life is a carnival, yeah. I was just watching Natalie Merchant.
Believe it or not. But the idea is, the idea behind that, I think, is interesting because it does give us a sense of purpose. And then, of course, with each individual image that Elsie Wheeler came up with. So I want to just recount this so people understand how this works. So we've got 2 people sitting at a table. We've got a stack of index cards. On the index cards are numbers on one side that she cannot see. He holds up a card with a number on the back. She's over there. She says, I envision a bomb failing to explode or whatever image she comes up with. Well, the first thing that came to her mind, he writes that down on the card, puts it aside, next card. And they go all the way around the wheel in very random order.
Yeah, and the shuffling's the key.
Shuffling is the key.
The random shuffling, because he is a clairvoyant, didn't want to put his clairvoyance into the picture. He wanted to keep himself detached enough so that he could do this in a fairly rigorous and scientific manner. He actually hid this stuff for like 50 years, got a PhD in education, did all this academic stuff, and then finally when I met him, he was just sort of going, okay, I've got this other side to me.
So when we bring this into the world, because when we look at an astrology chart, we've got this wheel. We know how typical astrology works. We've been talking about it for quite some time, at least I have, about it for many years, and it's a real passion of both of ours. When you bring this in, does this add a whole new dimension to the interpretation of the chart?
Oh yeah. Oh yeah, you can color it quite nicely. You don't have to use it. And I would advise any astrologer to kind of keep it over here until you've really gotten a handle on the more, what we would call scientific or clinical.
Clinical.
The clinical approach.
Right.
Yeah, and then you can start bringing the symbols in a little bit. You can have fun with them, but if you're doing serious astrology, I would get as rigorous a background.
Get the foundations down first, and this becomes sort of an adjunct.
An adjunct to it, yeah.
An adjunct. It helps you color the story and tells the story, because astrology really is a story. There's no question about it. It's a fascinating story. It's your story, and everybody's story is unique.
Yeah.
That's what's most important about it. Yeah. Your story is unique. You were brought here at a place in time to do a certain thing, and that is your purpose, and that is what your goal is. And when you know that, when you get verification of that, when you see the validation of that, your life becomes much richer, and you can finally see, you have these aha moments where, like, wow, this makes perfect sense. Of course this is why this is happening to me. And it's great for timing and seeing where things are. But when you think about that, it was purely random. And so that random quality has to have some sort of logic behind it.
Well, with the playing cards, the randomness taps into the gambling instinct. In other words, let's say the symbols he got for the playing cards were, that's a more immediate thing. You don't have to cast a chart. You can just lay the cards out. It has symbols like child skipping rope would be one of the symbols.
Mm-hmm.
Different woman, okay? So what you're doing is you're playing with that gambling instinct in terms of cards. Playing cards are all used, poker, you know.
Yeah, I've had people
blackjack.
talking about the cards, yeah.
Yeah, and that's kind of drilled into us, you know, even if we don't gamble, it's there in the culture. So when you're doing the cards, you're doing with more pure random chance. With the astrology, you're taking nature as a model and, you know, the cosmos,
And there's a certain precision. There's a certain. There's much
precision.
more of a scientific precision
Yeah.
to the scientific piece of
Yeah.
astrology, where now you're coming into
Yeah.
the world of tarot. Although tarot card readers will say if you pick a card, it's based on what you should be at that moment in time.
Right.
So it is. And then there's the whole branch of astrology which deals with just the moment of astrology, meaning that at this moment you're going to be feeling these impacts, these influences at the time. So.
But even so, astrology isn't a perfect mechanical model. It has degrees of freedom around each point.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, the symbols themselves are they're the serendipity factor. They explain why things happen. Like you right here, when you told me about coming to do this show, looked next door and there was a tea company there. And I've been involved in importing some tea from China, so I had two things I could do. I could come on this show, I could go next door. So that there's a randomness there.
There's a certain what I would call synchronicity.
Synchronicity,
It's synchronistic events, which another word for it would be serendipitous, coincidental. But they are. If you're here, you get a double hit.
Right. Yeah.
And that's what makes it fascinating.
Yeah.
And I think it makes it's wonderful because you're in a framework of things that are important to you,
Right.
part of your daily life, and yet they're very real, tangible events that are happening at this point in time.
Yeah. And what Jones was really trying to do with the astrology, symbols, again, the serendipitous factor, the actual clinical astrology, a little less serendipitous, a little more rigorous, but still a lot of freedom involved.
Mm-hmm.
And what he was trying to teach was the 4 C's. And the 4 was actually, it was 3. I always had the 4th, which is convergence, convenience, concomitance, and concordance.
What's concomitance?
Concomitance is when things are happening at the same time.
Oh, okay.
Again, it's synchronicity.
Synchronicity, yeah.
But you've got 4 words that explain what synchronicity is.
So what I find interesting about that is that Carl Jung, the psychologist, spent a lot of time working with synchronicity.
Right.
And there's logic behind the idea of synchronicity because of the fact that why do events happen which appear to be serendipitous or completely coincidental? We're like,
Right.
wow,
Yeah.
why I was just talking about this person, all of a sudden they're there. I haven't seen him in 30 years.
Yeah.
Why do those types of events happen? And I think that's what's interesting to find when we see this concomitance that you mentioned.
Yeah, and you can, the nice thing is there's other branches of astrology which, let's say you're born, I'm born with the widow, but then when I reached age, let's see, I was born 4 degrees into Taurus, so 26 years later, when I'm about 26 years old, I'm a Gemini.
Right.
Because the moon progresses.
The
sun progresses,
The sun progresses, right, yeah.
So now all of a sudden I'm a glass-bottom boat.
Oh, so you also use the progressions as well.
You
So
can look at that
progressions,
symbol.
I haven't discussed progressions as a segment yet, but I will. What happens is the idea behind the progressions is that each year that you age, the sun moves 1 degree away from where it was at your birth.
Right.
So however many years you are old, you take your whatever degree of your sun and you move it that further around the wheel.
Yeah,
so
you
if
go,
say-
yeah. So when I was 26, I entered the sign of Gemini.
Mhm.
So now, not only the Taurus is, I'm still a Taurus, but I've got this whole Gemini coloring going on, and this first degree, the symbol is a glass-bottom boat.
Which I think makes perfect sense, because you think of ourselves, we are incredibly complex individuals. We are so multifaceted. We can't really come down with it. And so I think that all of these different attributes that you're referring to are methodologies and a structure that allows us to accept that and accommodate and actually illustrate where
Right.
we are.
Right, right.
Hmm.
Yeah.
It's interesting when we think about that because the symbols are rich. So is that true for the progressed sun and the progressed moon?
Yeah, all 10 planets.
Okay, but the other planets don't progress that much. They move very
Well,
slow.
the moon actually does it.
The moon does
the
a
mo-
lot, yeah.
Yeah, if you take like I have my watch here, right? Which needs cleaning, but
Okay, it's okay.
that second hand would be representative of the moon. It's going around every 60 seconds, creating a minute, right?
Right.
So that's the moon. So I can go through moon symbols real fast
Exactly.
in a progression.
Right, exactly.
The sun moves a degree a year. The moon moves a
Roughly
degree in
Every month.
every month or
roughly.
so.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
And the and so what that does, that shows the evolution of a human entity through the course of history. We move through a time frame, and that is accommodated by those changes. Because we're born at a certain point in time, we have a static characteristic. Then we bring that static characteristic, which is who we are as individuals, and move it through the course of history. That static individual is going to change and be influenced by the environment and the time, which is a dynamic structure.
Yeah.
So it's the conversation between the static and the dynamic. We come into the world preloaded with a set of attributes, and then we bring that into a world that is constantly moving, and you are on that swirl of time, and that's where we see the changes.
Yeah.
And the reason this is valuable and important for people to understand is because it does give you an idea of how to be in the right place at the right time, or why you might be experiencing hardship at some point in your life and not in others, why you experience a prosperity at some times in your life or auspiciousness in your life and not in others. And I think it's important for that. And also to be able to be philosophical about where you are, why you are, where you are.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah. And you know, this is one little experiment. He, you know, like I say, he started with the playing cards, then he went to the symbols of the zodiac. He was digging up a 12th century medieval philosopher. He was writing just lesson set after lesson set of materials based on the Socratics. He was taking Bible materials and looking at that from a different perspective. He was looking at fairy tales, Grimm's fairy tales.
It's all there. That's what I love about this, because all of these different cultures, they are this, it's a repetitive pattern, a repetitive story that continues on.
Yeah.
We've been talking today with Michael Elliott about the Sabian symbols, which is a branch of astrology based on the individual degrees of the zodiac wheel. And I can give you more information if you want to contact me. You can also contact Michael through me if you wish, and we can get you to discover what that's all about. But each degree in your chart has a symbol, and those symbols are evident in this. And this is a fascinating piece of astrology because it can be used as a divination tool for the day. It can be used as a sort of a harbinger of what's to come in your life, and as a bellwether for where you might end up or where you may be. So it's fascinating. Michael, thank you very much for coming on, and we'll get you back on to talk more about the Sabian Assembly, and thank you all for watching.
Very enjoyable.